You doing high intensity training or looking to get started with it? Or maybe you're doing a more conventional, higher volume style of training, but looking to add some intensity techniques to your routine. Either way, if you're looking to make your sets hard, push beyond failure, and summon up the maximum amount of grit to really make your training pop, this video is for you. In my personal training, I'm using intensity techniques in every session on just about every single exercise. And I found that applying these intensity techniques actually looks quite different from exercise to exercise because some exercises just lend themselves better for certain techniques. The second I turn the camera on, someone starts sawing something next door. Yeah, I guess I don't even know if you guys can hear that, but I can hear it very loudly, so I imagine it's going to ruin the audio. Alas. So I thought it would be helpful to show several different examples of how to apply different intensity techniques to various different common exercises. And share with us in the comments, what are your favorite intensity techniques? Do any of these techniques that I mentioned have different common names that I don't know about? Or have you had any success creating your own innovative intensity techniques? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you like this shit. I'd really appreciate it. So who are intensity techniques for? Well, probably you, if you click this, but I'd say 3 groups could probably benefit from using intensity techniques. First of all, people who want to do high intensity training. After the first month or 2, you're going to need techniques like this. Second, people who do conventional higher volume training, using reps in reserve or RPE ratings, but who want to keep themselves honest about how hard they're actually training. From time to time, it's worth incorporating sets to failure and beyond, just to make sure your intensity is actually calibrated the way you think it is. And finally, anyone who wants to save time. Because at the end of the day, you can of course make your workouts harder by just resting more and then adding an extra set at the end of whatever you're currently doing. That's going to be harder and it's going to be more stimulus. But of course, in order to do this, the price is more time spent training. And at some point, it doesn't make more sense to continually add volume to your training and continually spend more and more time in the gym. So using these intensity techniques will give you more bang for your buck and more time efficiency on a per set basis. So the key principle here for adding intensity is how can I do more work after hitting failure? And by failure for these purposes, I mean concentric failure. So when you're unable to complete a full range of motion rep, you've hit failure, how can you then continue your set after that? Essentially, there are just 2 ways to do this. Either you reduce the difficulty of the exercise so that it's easier and you can continue doing it, or you only do easier parts of the exercise with the same weight that you still have the energy for. So it turns out that there's a plethora of techniques that meet either of these 2 criteria, so I'll share with you a bunch of the ones I'm doing in my training. Oh, what's that noise? Oh, it's just my neighbor Noah over there building a friggin' ark. First, I want to give a note on training logs and rep counting. When I'm training, I only count the original set of completed reps in my training log. So if I do 10 repetitions, then 4 partials, and then a drop set, I mark in the training log those first 10 repetitions. That's my achievement for the day, and that's what I'm targeting with progressive overload over time. Anything that comes after that, I'm still putting my heart and soul into, but as you'll see with many of these techniques, there's no really good way to actually count and quantify how much you're doing. The point is you're trying until you have nothing left to give. I can't reasonably measure the angle I hit on a partial or the number of seconds I pause in an isometric and come up with some sort of kilogram seconds of how much work I did afterwards. It just doesn't make sense. So I only count what's easy to count and what I'm rigorously trying to progress over time, which is my full proper form set. One thing that I'd like to stress here is that you can get really creative with these. There are no rules for this or any other training. Your body doesn't know these concepts. Your body just feels the force, the stress, and the effort. You do not have to do exactly what Mike Israel says some studies says you should do. You do not have to do exactly what I do or what I say you should do. Experiment, give things an honest chance, and keep only what works. Fitness, like everything else in life, is about seeing examples from other people, but then the real learning happens when you put it into practice yourself, iterate on it, and make it your own. So don't just jump to conclusions, try things out, and see how they work for you. So in practice, you can actually combine a lot of these techniques into one single drop set. So for example, on pull-ups, I'm cheating on the last rep with body English. On the first rep that I fail, I do a max isometric hold, and then I do partial reps. Then I stand back up, skipping the concentric. Then I do isometric holds from about 90 degrees until they turn into forced reps where I'm doing a slow controlled eccentric. Then I take the weight off my harness and I do a drop set with full concentric reps at body weight until failure and do all the same techniques again. So the only limit here is your own creativity and the amount of energy you have. So a lot of these techniques will be especially useful for those of you who are training at home without a partner or have minimal equipment, because that's my situation, and so I've had to get creative. So the first technique is partial reps. I've got 2 questions for you. Do you train to failure, and do you use partial reps in your training? That was a test. If you answered yes to one of those questions, you should have answered yes to the other. Training to failure implies doing partial reps. You cannot take a set to failure without doing at least one partial repetition. If you complete every one of your reps and none of them was a partial, then you didn't fail. You might have trained hard, you might have hit RPE 10, but there's no way to prove it because you didn't actually fail. The rep where you hit failure is a partial rep. So you can either stop there or you can continue to attempt more partial reps with progressively less range of motion. Next we have cheat reps, or reps where you change your form. For basically every exercise, I start out with the type of form that I want to perform, but for those last couple repetitions where it's very hard, I start to let my form change in terms of cheating with leverage and changing the body position. In a sense, this is sort of like adding a very slight drop set to it because the last couple repetitions are slightly easier than the first ones. So you're effectively improving your leverage a tiny bit in order to get a few extra seconds of maximal concentric contraction. I suspect people are going to say that my form is terrible and that I'm risking injury by doing this, but honestly, I don't think so, and that hasn't been my experience at all. The grind reps done with cheating form are done infrequently. I'm not doing these for 5 sets per exercise, 4 exercises per body part. I'm doing them for 1 set per exercise, 1 to 2 exercises per body part. So the dose is very important here. Don't overdo it. The next one we have is the rest pause. This is where you pause in the middle of a set, take a few breaths, and then continue, which often allows you to get an extra rep or 2. I tend to use this one more naturally rather than planned. As I'm getting more and more tired throughout a set, my tempo slows down anyways, and as I get closer to failure, usually I'm pausing at least briefly to get a little bit more energy. But mostly just to muster up the grit and focus to get that one more rep that feels like it's going to be impossible. This is especially pronounced in my pull-ups because I find resetting the grip before the last final rep or 2 to be very, very helpful. Also in lower body exercises like squats and Jefferson curls, I get really out of breath while doing them, so it's useful to pause, catch my breath, and then keep going. Next we have drop sets, and drop sets are sort of an overarching term for doing an extra set at a lower intensity after your primary set becomes too hard. There are a zillion ways to do drop sets, and pretty much all of the subsequent techniques are just specific implementations of drop sets. The first is the barbell drop set. This is very, very simple. You hit failure with your working weight, you put the bar down, you take off 20 to 30% of the weight, and then you pick it right back up and keep going. For the intensity, just use your noggin here. If you're failing in 1 rep, it's too hard. You could have just done another partial rep with the same weight. And if you're failing in 15 or more reps, it's probably too easy. You're not really getting a hypertrophy or strength stimulus anymore. This works exactly the same on the machine. Just drop the pin down, 20 to 30% of the weight, and then keep cranking. I don't have any machines at my home gym here, but you get the idea of what that looks like. The next is the dumbbell drop set. So when I'm using my adjustable dumbbells at home, it takes a long ass time to reload the weight after a set. So in practice, it's a lot easier to just drop one of the dumbbells and continue working on a slightly modified exercise, but just with the weight of one of the dumbbells. So in this case, it's obviously half the weight. So this means you're actually doing a different exercise, like holding the one dumbbell in 2 hands. But in the case of the Arnold press, it works extremely well because you can just immediately go into anterior deltoid presses, which are a harder exercise. So 50% of the weight feels pretty good. Obviously, if you're training at a commercial gym and you have an entire set of dumbbells with different weights, you can just put your dumbbell back, grab the right weight, and then continue. But I've used this for most of my pressing movements and for bicep curls. But that begs the question, well, why don't you just do the anterior deltoid press if you like it so much, John? But then what would I do for the drop set? Actually, I really like the stimulus of both of them. I feel like it hits my entire shoulder in a way that just one doesn't. Next is the body weight drop set. Do a set of weighted calisthenics exercises like dips or pull-ups, and then drop the weight and hit body weight until failure. I use these for pull-ups, dips, and hanging leg raises. Also, don't be afraid to do a banded body weight drop set. If your exercise starts out at body weight, then you can add a band to make the drop set easier. My partner does banded drop sets for her pull-ups to great success. Next is isometric pauses. If you can't make the weight move up, you should be able to hold it still for a few seconds and still get a good stimulus. For dips, I like to do these at the top because once I fail my last dip, I can just stand up into the top position and then take a few isometric pauses on the way down. For pull-ups, I do these in roughly the middle because when I'm standing up straight and holding the bar, my elbows are bent at about 90 degrees, so I can just do isometric holds from there. Next technique is using momentum. Honestly, these are not really my favorite. I find that if I'm using a bunch of momentum, it tends to just totally deload the movement and I'm not actually getting that much out of it. So usually I just use these as a method to get the weight back up to the top position so I can do a controlled isometric or eccentric rep from there. That said, for an exercise like barbell rows, where the top of the range of motion is much harder than the bottom of the range of motion, this can be useful. The next is force reps or eccentric only reps. So here you use something other than the working muscles to get you back to the top position, and then you can try to control the weight on the way down. This works really well with dips, for example. Or for instance, you can use momentum to swing up the dumbbells in a bicep curl and then slowly lower down. These are often referred to as force reps when you have your buddy help you lift the weight up so that you can control it alone on the way down. But if you're like me and you live a lonely life struggling to make friends, then we just have to make do with what we can. Honestly, this sounds dope, but I do the vast majority of my training alone so that I can do it over lunchtime at home, so I'm the only one who can lift it. So I hope you find these useful. Hopefully these gave you a couple ideas to incorporate into your own training. And again, I want to reiterate, the point is that you can be very creative with these. You're only limited by your own equipment and your own ingenuity. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate your time. Subscribe if you got value from this, and let's get strong for life together.